Hey y'all, welcome to Book Marketing Mania. I'm Kim, a book marketing strategist for Christian authors, and I'm so thrilled you're here to learn how to grow your author platform, market your book on podcast, and steward your message in a way that honors God and your time. So imagine getting to speak to a room full of your target readers. They have questions, you have the answers. They have problems, you have the solutions. You have a burning message on your heart for others, right? If only there was an event already planned, all the details taken care of, the attendees already invited and waiting, and you just have to show up. You don't even have to do your hair or makeup in some cases, and you don't have to leave your home. You just have to show up to serve. If that's your dream, you can make it come true. No shirt, no shoes, no problem. Oh, wait, you probably need a shirt. So, no shoes, no book, no problem. You can start speaking to and growing your audience today by guesting on podcast, even from the comfort of your home. Today, we're kicking off our Grow by Guesting summer series, short and sweet episodes to help you grow an audience of book buyers by guesting on podcast. And y'all, I used to teach on marketing in my corporate job and present. And my managers were always like, you're such a great speaker. If we could just teach you the technical side of business, we could have you speak on that too. And yikes, y'all, I don't know what they were talking about because I am an awful speaker on stages. I remember speaking at Proverbs 31 Ministries She Speaks conference several years ago, and I get all the nerves speaking in person. I get so worked up about it, really sweaty. Yuck, I can't remember anything I'm going to say. That's just not my strong suit, and it's not something I have worked to perfect. Even when the topic is something I'm an expert in, you'd never know it watching me speak on stage, y'all. But I love speaking behind a mic, both as a guest and a host. And gaining speaking experience was one of the reasons I started my podcast. And just by establishing myself as a podcaster, in my first year alone, I was invited to guest on 8 podcasts and present at one online summit, giving me even more speaking experience and growing my audience of writers and authors who wanted to learn more about book marketing. Guesting on podcast is a great way to grow your audience while growing your speaking experience. Plus, if you're traveling, you can still record interviews. On episode 39, Dr. Sandra Smith talked about being your own publicist. And she said, I do a lot of podcast interviews when traveling because as long as I have my mic and a camera, I can always plug in and do those, even if I'm in a hotel. And y'all, we're not talking about anything fancy. You could use your phone and a USB mic or even a little lavalier mic that pins on your shirt if the audio is great quality. And I'll put a link to my favorite ones in the show notes. And if you heard Barb Roos's episode 77 where she guested, she mentioned that publishers want to see your speaking platform in your book proposal because they know it's a great way to sell books when the time comes. So now you might be thinking, this all sounds great, but what if I don't have a book yet? What will I pitch podcasts to speak on? So first, I know that some podcasts only interview authors. And if that's the case of a prospective podcast you want to guest on, then just simply make a note of it and move on to others because there are a ton of podcasts who are all about the topics. And if you are able to bring value to their listeners, they are not waiting until you have a book to have you as a guest on their show. So as a part of your podcast pitching strategy, like we talked about in episode 32, think of a variety of topics you can speak on. You can speak on popular content from your blog, your social media, your podcast, or even other guest episodes could be turned into a podcast pitching topic. And I did this for one of my clients. We looked at her most popular blog post and also her lead magnets, especially seasonal ones, and created podcast pitching topics and talking points from them. You could talk about any Christian living topic, Bible study. Moms could talk about raising teens, meal planning, budgeting, self-care, your cancer journey. The list goes on of things that you have experienced and the way that God's intersected what's going on with that experience in your journey. So like I could talk about my faith. I could talk about being a special needs mom. I could talk about being an entrepreneur while raising a child with autism. I could talk about being in the sandwich generation and caring for elderly parents and grandparents while also raising my own children. Then, you could think of topics from your professional journey as an author, a speaker, or a podcaster. So obviously I could talk about book marketing, but I could also talk about my journey from corporate marketing to marketing Christian books when I thought I wanted to write my own book. And I could talk about starting a podcast, just like you too could if you are hosting a podcast. I could talk about being consistent and never missing an episode for 2 years and not falling victim to pod fade. Or you could talk about topics from your current profession that's outside of being an author. If you have a quote unquote day job outside the home where you're doing something that's other than, writing books, then you could talk about those things. Like if you're a life coach, or maybe you're a mental health professional, you're a teacher, or you're doing something else. Maybe you have something from a previous profession. So I know I could talk about starting and leading a nonprofit organization in my community, which I did for several years. One of my clients is a mental health professional who's also a faith-based author, and she runs a big private practice, but it's not just faith-based, so she could talk to secular shows reaching therapists and students about the mental health profession and leading a large staff, dealing with patients, etc. And being a mental health professional, there's a never-ending list of topics she could personalize for different podcast audiences and timely ones with Mental Health Month, the holidays, etc. So think outside the box of your author self this week and come up with 3 topics you can talk about as a guest on a podcast, pulling from your current content, your personal journey, and or your professional journey. That way you can just automatically think, okay, I don't have to have my book in hand, right? You don't have to talk about your book. You're just going to pick these topics to talk about. And there's so many podcasts and so many different niches where you could serve their target readers long before you write your book and start building your audience of book buyers. Now, the key with that is being strategic to lead those listeners to join your email list. And that's what we're going to be talking about next week as we continue our series to help you beat the heat to build your audience of book buyers this summer by guesting on podcast. And if you have some burning questions about growing your audience on podcast or how to pitch a podcast, I've opened up some special 30-minute calls for my listeners throughout June and July, so we can jump on the phone quick and get your questions answered wherever it's convenient for you this summer. No shoes, no book, no problem. Go to kimstewart.com/summer to grab a phone call there, and I'll put a link here in your podcast player too. And I can't wait to help you beat the heat and grow your audience of book buyers this summer. That's all for today. And as always, I'll be there for you next week to help you market your book one podcast at a time. See you then.